Now let's dive deep into this big LGBTQ story for today. I'm Rex Rogosh, and let's clear up gay culture. Survivors to revisit Pulse Nightclub before it's demolished. 9 years after the Pulse Nightclub shooting shook the heart of the LGBTQ community, survivors and families are returning to the site in Orlando one last time. The building, where 49 people were killed and 53 injured in what was then the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history, will soon be torn down to make way for a permanent memorial. Orlando purchased the property in 2023 for $2 million, with a $12 million memorial expected to open by 2027. This week, about 250 survivors and family members were walking through the nightclub in small groups. Family members of the 49 victims can bring up to 6 guests. Survivors, many of whom have become vocal advocates for gun law reform, are invited with one companion and will also have a chance to speak with FBI agents who investigated the massacre. Brandon Wolf, who survived by hiding in a bathroom, was chosen not to return. Now, with the Human Rights Campaign, he said, quote, "The site of the tragedy is where I feel closest to the people who were stolen from me. For survivors, the last time they were in that space was the worst night possible. It will be really hard to be in that space again," end quote. The Pulse shooting left a deep scar, but this memorial aims to honor, love, not fear. Well, on today, which is the day of Pulse, I was not there personally. I didn't live here, but it would have been a club that I would have been at, and it would have been a night that I would have been at. And I have friends who were personally there who are survivors. And the fact that 9 years later we're still having to deal with trying to get a memorial has been a struggle. And hopefully this starts to bring some healing space and time for them. Grief and tragedy comes in many forms and has no timeline.
Sites of tragedies are often weird that way. We
Correct.
We have to debate and make consensus on what is suitable and what families and survivors would like to do. I mean, there's this tower in London that caught on fire 10 years ago, and it's still not torn down yet. They just put a plastic cover on it. And 9/11 took 10 years to basically decide what to do with it.
I mean, there's unfortunately, and there's always a lot of red tape. There's other things that are involved that people don't know about, as far, especially when it comes to building things. However, we tend to be a little faster at doing things for certain sectors, but when it comes to LGBT, I mean, we just finally got a memorial for the Holocaust survivors of LGBT
in Paris.
So this, has taken a while. There's been some controversy around why it's taken so long as well. So I'm glad to see that it's finally moving forward, so that way we can gain some closure for those people who are survivors and the family and friends of the people who unfortunately we lost.
No, I hear you on that, but as you were saying, Pulse, it was a wound, it's a scar on our community of what that man did to us.
Absolutely.
I was not there either, but we all felt it that day. I've had the privilege of interviewing Brandon Wolf before, and he'll talk through the story of what he experienced that day. I've met people who volunteered at the hospital that night to explain to where the doctors listed off the people who were being treated, and then all the other families there who are why wasn't our relative mentioned, and how they had to get grief counselors then immediately and deal with just anytime you deal with this issue, it's gut-wrenching. So to see, I completely understand people like Brandon not wanting to go back. I get that. Taking a little while on a memorial, that's, as you were saying, it's hard because you do need to get input. The owners, I believe they tried to do something. They weren't successful, which makes sense. They're trying to do a nonprofit, but they run a business. It's very different. So it's understandable, and it's both a tragedy to finally see the building go down, but also I've seen the plans for the memorial, and it does look like a beautiful way to move forward.
We covered that on the show.
We did.
Yes.
Bring closure to these people. I mean, all of the site being there, it just triggers all the trauma that they lived over and over and over again, especially if they live in that area. So it's a good idea.
And unfortunately, I mean, we still today as a community deal with this. I mean, if anybody wants to, sit there and complain about why they get carded to get into a nightclub, or why they have to get pat down, or why we pay, cover charges to pay for security. It's because of this event.
Yes.
Well, we should be careful with that, because people forget that like security doesn't actually make us secure. There was actually a police officer within seconds to actually engage with the shooter. But unfortunately, when people bring in these sorts of weapons of mass destruction, security is not going to help people.
I understand that, but I used to come from the time when you could just walk willy-nilly into any nightclub without an ID and, wave a flag and go hi. So, I mean, we have seen, and I do agree, security doesn't necessarily secure us, and I unfortunately have been, a victim of a gun holdup myself. So I get that, and I was in a secured building. Mm-hmm. So I get that, but however, there are so many people who complain and talk about it, and so I just want to, bring to light that, guys, we are still dealing with this, and this memorial is the first step in healing for many people, but it's not something that will ever go away, and it's something that we shouldn't just rest on our laurels.
Which is why when we are going to Pride this weekend and any other Pride afterwards, remember, sometimes we just have to pay a little for security just so that things, are taken care of.
And you got to put up with the padding and, showing the ID and staying in line. It's all part of the process, but it's all, safety first.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it really doesn't make us safe. These are things that people have been pushing that just continue to push this police state of a country, when we actually need to deal with gun reform and deal with making sure that these weapons are taken away.
100%. I'm not going to argue with that at all. But
U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq were very heavily armed. It did not protect all of them. I'm just saying, you cannot truly make things secure when these sorts of weapons are out in the public.
And I think, Alex, that's a great long-term goal. But, being involved in city government in the city of Wilton Manors, and knowing the mayor and some of the commissioners personally and some of the planners, I think it's wonderful that they do have made the budget for scanning people. It's not something that I enjoy, but if you look back to some of the tragedies such as what we're talking about today, it's our reality now. It's not our goal for the future. I was lucky enough to enjoy many prides in New York City over the years before I came to Florida over 5 years ago. And certainly to have to go through those maneuvers to enjoy an event, at first it was a little bit put offish. But, certainly I understand.
No, I mean, Wilton Manors commissioners, I think their handling of Pride has not been appropriate. I think greater policing doesn't help, especially since we're going to talk about policing at Pride. In Florida, they're using the police to target people in new ways. I have no idea what policing at Pride is going to look like now. What about immigrants at Pride when you have this much policing? And at the end of the day, as I said, not only were there police at Pulse, there were police at Columbine. There were police targeted by a shooter in Dallas once. The good guy with a gun does not help. It is a myth that I have written about for years, disproving, and I really worry when I see people continue to push this. But at the same time, this memorial, fortunately, isn't part of that.
Well, and just to let you know, and I don't want to take away from the main topic here, but when I attend a commission meeting in the city on behalf of the West Side Association, everyone that goes into the meeting has to go through a scanning process. And unfortunately, we look at a story, I believe that's going to be tonight. Harvey Milk was gunned down. He was a government official. You like to think that things like that don't happen. We've had people go off the rails in Wilton Manors on several occasions. And I won't take away from this main topic, but,
Well, unfortunately, San Francisco did have metal detectors back then, with a former city councilor who went through an old unlocked window, but that's a whole other story.
Well, I mean, like I said, as you can tell, Pulse and other current events have really, scarred our community, and not just our community, but, the United States in general. So this memorial is definitely a step in the right direction, and we obviously have a lot more to talk about and a lot more to debate, both on both sides, what's right and what's wrong, and how things should be handled. But at least we're talking about it openly, and hopefully we're moving forward. So that is our big LGBTQ story for today. There is no other queer nonprofit media platform like this in the entire world. Support our LGBTQ stories by subscribing and sharing Queer News Tonight.